So here's the thing about doing something good for a stranger. You get a little rush from the abstract idea of being a hero. I'm 48 years old and I teach high school history. My life is not exactly a highlight reel of dramatic events. I signed up for the bone marrow registry a decade ago. It seemed like a simple and decent thing for a person to do. They told me the odds of being a match were incredibly slim, yet they called me for the first time 7 years ago. They called me again 3 years after that for the same person. Then they called me a third time just 6 months ago. The nurses said my recipient was a real fighter to need so much help. I felt a strange connection to this anonymous person out there. My wife Sarah thought it was a beautiful testament to my character. She would tell our friends about my donations with a proud look. Our life is quiet and orderly in our small suburban house. We have our routines and our comfortable silences after 20 years together. Last week, a thick envelope arrived with no return address. Inside was a thank you card written in elegant looping cursive. It was from the recipient's mother, sent through the donation center. She broke the anonymity rules a little bit with what she wrote. She thanked me for saving her son's life for the third time. She mentioned that he was finally well enough to visit his favorite place. It was a little spot called Miller's Point by the old reservoir. He could finally sit by the water and watch the sailboats again. I felt a cold knot tighten deep in my stomach. Miller's Point was a local spot from my own teenage years. It was where I took my first serious girlfriend decades ago. Before that letter, my life felt like a well-paved road. Every day was predictable in a way that I found comforting. I would go to school and talk about the fall of Rome. Then I would come home to the smell of Sarah's cooking. We never had children of our own after years of trying. It was a quiet sadness that eventually settled into simple acceptance. My donations felt like a way to give something back to the world. It was a paternal act for a man who was not a father. Sarah's best friend Chloe often said, "I had a hero's spirit." Chloe has been a constant presence in our lives for 15 years. She was the one who encouraged me to join the registry. I remember her telling me about the desperate need for donors. She had a passionate intensity about it that seemed admirable at the time. She said that saving a stranger was the purest form of kindness. I think back to that conversation at our dinner table years ago. Sarah agreed with her enthusiastically while I just nodded along. Chloe's own life has always been a bit of a mystery. She moved here from another state and never talked much about her past. We all just accepted that she wanted a fresh start. Now that single detail in the letter feels like a loose thread. It's a tiny inconsistency in the fabric of my quiet, orderly life. I tried to forget about the letter for a couple of days. I told myself it was just a strange and meaningless coincidence. The world is full of places named Miller's Point, but the thought festered in my mind like a splinter. It kept me awake at night next to my sleeping wife. I felt a growing obsession that I knew was not healthy. I felt ashamed of the suspicion that was taking root inside me. This was my quiet life and my stable marriage. I should not be inventing strange dramas or conspiracies. On the third night, I couldn't stand the silence any longer. I went downstairs after Sarah was asleep and opened my laptop. My hands were shaking slightly as I typed in the search terms. I started with something innocent, just looking up the park itself. I scrolled through pictures of families having picnics by the reservoir. Then I added the word leukemia to the search. I felt a deep sense of trespass, like I was violating a sacred trust. The search results were a mix of medical sites and news articles. I found a link to a local community fundraising website. The headline was about supporting local families battling cancer. I clicked on it with a feeling of impending dread. The page was full of stories and pictures of smiling people. Then I saw a photo of a young man sitting on a bench. He was thin and pale but had a gentle smile. He was looking out over a body of water with sailboats. My breath caught in my throat because I recognized the place instantly. It was the exact view from Miller's Point. But it was the young man's face that made my world stop. He had my eyes, the same shape and the same dark color. It was like looking at a ghost of myself from 25 years ago. I felt a dizzying wave of nausea wash over my entire body. I read the text below the photograph with a hammering heart. His name was Leo, and he was 19 years old. He was a student who loved art and sailing, and he was fighting his third relapse of acute myeloid leukemia. My donation had been for him. I was sure of it now. I scrolled down the page, my mind racing and refusing to connect the dots. I found the section about his family and his devoted single mother. Her name was listed right there in plain black and white text. Her name was Chloe. I shut the laptop and sat in the dark for a long time. The silence of the house felt heavy and suffocating. The name Chloe echoed in my head, a name that once meant friendship. Now it felt like the name of a stranger, a suspect. I went back to bed but did not sleep for the rest of the night. I watched the ceiling and tried to build a case against myself. There must be thousands of women named Chloe in this country. It was a common name, and the situation was just a coincidence. I was creating a dark fantasy because my own life felt too simple. I felt a deep and profound guilt for my suspicious thoughts. Chloe was Sarah's best friend, a part of our small family. My mind was betraying the trust we had all built over the years. The next morning at breakfast, I tried to sound casual. I asked Sarah if she knew much about Chloe's life before she moved here. I wondered aloud if she had ever been married or had other family. Sarah looked at me over the rim of her coffee mug. Her expression was one of mild annoyance, not suspicion. She told me that I was being strangely inquisitive about our friend. She said Chloe's past was her own business and we shouldn't pry. She reminded me that some people move to find peace, not to be interrogated. I tried to explain my strange feeling about the thank you letter. I mentioned the park and how it felt too specific. Sarah just shook her head and told me I was overthinking everything. She said the donations were probably making me feel overly connected to the recipient. She suggested I was creating a story to make sense of it all. Her words were calm and reasonable, but they made me feel crazy. I felt like a fool for even bringing it up to her. For the rest of the day, I tried to believe her words. I tried to push the image of the boy with my eyes from my head, but a new, colder feeling was starting to settle deep inside me. I was beginning to doubt my wife. Sarah's denial did not bring me any peace. Her calm explanation felt rehearsed and carefully constructed. I spent the next few days in a fog of suspicion. At school, I would stand in front of my history class. I would talk about betrayals between empires and ancient kings. All the while, I was thinking about the betrayal in my own home. I could no longer look at my wife without seeing a stranger. Her every kindness now felt like a part of a performance. I knew I had to find more proof before I lost my mind. I needed something concrete that she could not dismiss or explain away. I waited until she was out for a long afternoon with her friends. Then I went back to the fundraising page for the young man. His full name was Leo Vance, which was listed on the site. I typed his name into a social media search bar. His profile was public, and his face appeared on my screen. It was a gallery of a life I knew nothing about. There were pictures of him as a little boy at the beach. He was holding a plastic shovel and smiling with missing teeth. He had the same crooked smile that I see in my own childhood photos. I scrolled through years of his life, feeling like a voyeur. There were awkward school pictures and photos with his friends. The resemblance to me at that age was simply undeniable. Then I found an older post from his first diagnosis years ago. It was a plea for support from his mother, Chloe. The comments section was filled with messages of hope and encouragement. I scrolled through them numbly, reading the names of strangers. Then I saw a name that made the blood freeze in my veins. It was my wife's name, Sarah, with her maiden name attached. The profile picture was an old one of her with our dog. Her comment was from 4 years ago, clear as day. She had written that she was thinking of them both. She told them that they were so strong and would get through this. The screen blurred as a cold rage settled over me. She had known all along, for years she had known. She had watched me donate my marrow to save my own son, and she had never said a single word. I did not close the laptop when I heard her car in the driveway. I left it open on the kitchen table like a piece of evidence. She came inside with bags of groceries and a cheerful smile. She talked about her day and the people she had met. I watched her move around the kitchen, a stranger in my house. Her normalcy was the most shocking thing I had ever witnessed. I waited until she had put everything away and the room was quiet. I did not raise my voice or show any of my internal rage. I simply asked her to come and look at something with me. She walked over with a curious expression on her face. Then she saw the screen and the color drained from her cheeks. She looked from the picture of Leo to her own comment below it. She looked at me, and for the first time, I saw true fear in her eyes. I asked her a very simple and direct question. I asked her to tell me who Leo Vance was. At first, she tried to deny everything, just as I expected. She claimed it was a different Sarah, a random coincidence. But her voice was thin and weak, and the lie fell apart. I just stared at her without saying another word. The silence was heavy and broke her down completely. She started crying and admitted that she knew. She told me the whole story in broken sentences. Chloe was a friend from her hometown that she had reconnected with. Chloe had confessed to her about her sick son years ago. They realized from the boy's blood type that I could be a match. It was Chloe who begged her to keep it a secret from me. She was afraid that the truth would destroy our comfortable life. So my wife agreed to the deception to protect our marriage. She let me save my son's life under a horrible, twisted lie. There was no shouting after she finished her confession. The rage I expected to feel was replaced by a vast emptiness. Her tears seemed like a distant and unimportant event. I did not feel pity for her, only a profound sense of detachment. I stood up from the table without saying another word to her. I walked upstairs and went into the guest room. I closed the door and heard it click shut behind me. That small sound felt like the end of my entire life. I looked around the clean and impersonal room. It was a space for visitors, not for a husband. I spent the night staring at the unfamiliar patterns on the ceiling. Every memory of my 20-year marriage now felt tainted. I saw our shared laughter and quiet moments as an elaborate lie. My wife was not my partner, but the guardian of a secret. She had chosen her loyalty to Chloe over her loyalty to me. My act of anonymous charity was now a grotesque family drama. I was not a hero who had saved a stranger's life. I was a biological resource that had been cleverly exploited. They had taken my blood and my bone marrow to fix a problem they had both agreed I should never know about. The silence from the master bedroom down the hall was absolute. We were two strangers living on opposite sides of a wall. My home had become a cold and unfamiliar territory. My world had not just shifted, it had completely dissolved. I was left floating in the silent wreckage of my past. I lived in that guest room for 3 days. We moved around each other in the house like ghosts. The silence was a physical presence between us now. Sarah tried to speak to me a few times. Her apologies were quiet and pleading, but I felt nothing. Her sorrow was her own problem, not mine. On the 4th morning, I woke up with a new sense of clarity. The grief and the shock had burned away into something hard. I was no longer interested in understanding why they did it. I did not care about their fears or their justifications. My focus had narrowed down to a single, cold purpose. I was going to take back the truth that was stolen from me. I was not looking for a fight or a reconciliation. I simply wanted to end the lie they had both constructed. I went online and found Chloe's full name on the donation page. I used a public records database to find her current address. It was in a town only 40 minutes away from my house. She had been living that close to me for all these years. The thought did not make me angry, it just solidified my resolve. I got dressed and went downstairs without making a sound. I took my car keys from the hook by the door. I drove through the familiar streets of my own town. Then I merged onto the highway that led toward hers. I felt a strange and unsettling calm as I drove. The part of me that felt betrayed was now silent. A colder, more deliberate part of me was now in control. I was no longer a victim of their secret. I was an active participant in its final chapter. I parked on the street and looked at her house. It was a simple blue house with white trim. There was a bicycle leaning against the porch. It looked like any other normal and peaceful family home. I sat in the car for a few minutes, feeling the finality of my decision. Then I got out and walked up the concrete path to her front door. I rang the doorbell and waited, my heart beating a slow, steady rhythm. The door opened and Chloe stood there. Her eyes widened in shock and a dawning, absolute horror. She recognized me instantly from the photos Sarah had shown her. She opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. I did not need to yell or accuse her of anything. I just told her that I knew the truth about her son. A young man appeared behind her in the hallway. He was thin and looked tired, but he stood tall. It was Leo, and he was staring at me with open curiosity. He asked his mother who I was and what was happening. As Chloe was stammering, my phone began to buzz in my pocket. I pulled it out and saw Sarah's name on the screen. Chloe must have sent her a panicked text message. I rejected the call and put the phone back in my pocket. It immediately started ringing again, a frantic and useless alarm. I ignored it and held my ground on her doorstep. I was no longer to be managed. I was a reality that she could not escape. The carefully constructed wall around her life had just been broken, and I was the one who had just kicked down the door. I ignored Chloe's panicked pleas for me to leave. I stepped over her threshold into the small, neat entryway. There were pictures on the wall of a life I had no part in, a smiling boy on a swing and a teenager at a school dance. I felt like an intruder from a different reality. Leo was standing there looking from his terrified mother to me. He was waiting for an explanation that she was unable to give him. My phone was still buzzing frantically, a constant vibration against my leg. I pulled it out, looked at Sarah's name on the screen one last time, then I deliberately silenced the call and turned the phone off completely. That connection was now severed, and I felt a cold sense of release. I focused all my attention on the young man before me. I told him that we needed to talk about his mother and my wife. I used a quiet voice that cut through the tension in the room. I started by telling him my name. Then I told him that I was his biological father. The words dropped into the silence like stones into a still pond. Leo's expression shifted from confusion to a deep, profound shock. He looked at Chloe, searching for a denial that never came. Her silence was a confession that damned her completely. I gave them no time to recover from the first blow. I then explained my role as his anonymous bone marrow donor. I told him I had saved his life 3 separate times. The color completely drained from his face as he understood. His life was tied to a man his mother had treated like a secret. I saw the horror dawn in his eyes, the awful weight of the truth. He understood that his survival was built upon a terrible deception. Then I delivered the final, most cruel piece of the puzzle. I told him his mother and my wife had orchestrated everything. They had known from the very beginning that I was a match. They had conspired to use me to keep him alive. They chose to keep the two of us apart in the dark. I did not say it with malice, but with the flat tone of a historian. I had come to deliver a truth, not to start a new relationship. My purpose was to destroy their secret world, and I had succeeded. I turned around without another word and walked back toward the door. I left them standing in the silent aftermath of my revelation. The drive home was a blur of traffic lights and road signs. I did not feel the cold satisfaction that I had expected. There was no sense of victory or vindication, only a deep quiet. When I arrived home, the house was even emptier than before. Sarah's car was gone from the driveway. Inside, I found a note on the kitchen table where my laptop had been. It just said that she had gone to stay with her sister. I crumpled it up and threw it in the trash. I walked through the silent rooms of the house we had shared. In our bedroom, I saw the empty space in the closet. Her clothes were gone, and the room felt strangely large. I had won the argument, but the prize was this hollow silence. The days that followed were all the same. I went to work and taught my classes like an automaton. I came home to a house that was no longer a home. No one called me to scream or to demand an explanation. Not Chloe, not Sarah, and not the son I will never know. My final brutal act of truth was met with absolute silence. It was as if I had thrown a stone into a deep well. I never even heard the sound of it hitting the bottom. I am a father who is not a father. I am a husband who is no longer a husband. I saved a life, and in exchange, I completely erased my own. There was no lesson to be learned from any of this. There is no moral to the story for me to find. There is only the quiet house and the endless empty nights. I sometimes look in the mirror above the bathroom sink. I see a middle-aged man with tired eyes. I do not recognize him at all. If you enjoyed this video, support it with a like, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment with your thoughts. Your reaction helps me create new stories.